Story 1. AITA for telling my brother-in-law he's going bald after he told me I'm gaining weight. I'm F18. My older sister Lizzie is 27, and her husband David is 30. David is a bully, and I don't like him. He always comments on my weight every single time. Mind you, my weight is perfect for my height, and I can run a marathon. I'm way fitter than he is, but he always manages to suggest that I'm gaining weight. While I've learned not to let it get to me, I don't appreciate someone acting like this in the family. I've already spoken to Lizzie, but she doesn't do anything, and my parents say it would be rude to tell him not to greet or show concern. Once, I confronted him, and he said he was concerned for my health. I told him that if he has any health concerns about me, he should bring it up to Lizzie, who can talk to me as my sister, rather than him, a grown man with whom I have no bond, acting like a bully. Anyway, he kept doing it. So my brother 20 suggested I bring up his hair, as he's obsessed with trying to save what's left of it, with little success. So I did it last night. They visited us, and David told me it looked like I'd gained weight. I responded, "It looks like you've lost quite a bit of hair since we last met, and at this rate, you'll be bald before 32. He got visibly upset, went to the bathroom to check his hair, and then told Lizzie and my parents that he was greatly offended. I just shrugged and said that as long as he talks about my weight, I'll bring up him going bald. If he stops, I will too. While Lizzie thinks this is fair game, my parents think I'm being an asshole and want me to apologize to David and be the bigger person. My brother says I did well. Story 2. I discovered a family secret which allowed me to escape my entitled mom and stepdad's abuse. Growing up, I thought I had a good relationship with my parents, mom and dad, aka stepdad, and my 3 younger siblings, YB1, YS, and YB2. However, around 5th grade, that relationship began to change. I had always excelled at school, so my parents sent me to a private school with great test scores, where students had excellent placements in colleges later on. I was really excited to attend a private middle school with my friends, as we'd all been accepted. Unfortunately, at that time, my parents sat me down and explained that they couldn't afford my tuition anymore, and had to withdraw YB1 and YS from the elementary school I attended for the same reason. They told me I'd be enrolled in the local public middle school the following year. Towards the end of 5th grade, we were doing a science class, and my teacher started our Introduction to Genetics unit. That lesson stuck with me because I realized how different my appearance was compared to my parents. As of now, I'm in my 20s, and I literally share no features with my mom. I started asking my teacher some difficult questions about genetics. After explaining which traits tend to be dominant, she realized where I was going and quickly shut me down. Over that summer, I read every book I could on the subject before doing something dumb. I went to my dad and asked him if I was adopted. That conversation didn't end well. I don't remember everything that was said, but it escalated quickly and ended with him hitting me. He hit me so hard that he actually broke my right cheekbone. My mom rushed me to the hospital, and I was coached into saying that I was accidentally hit by a doorknob, which I had to repeat to CPS. After I returned from the hospital, my mom and dad revealed that he was actually my stepdad. They told me that when they were in college, my mom had been dating a guy she described as a real asshole. When she found out she was pregnant, he left her. But my stepdad stepped up and took on the role of my father, even putting his name on my birth certificate. My mom explained that confronting my stepdad hurt him, and he lashed out in anger. They both asked for forgiveness, and unfortunately, I agreed. My stepdad would come home from work and want nothing to do with me. As a kid, I was a massive nerd who loved going to museums and doing nerdy things, with no interest in sports. My brothers were the exact opposite, and my stepdad spent much of his free time playing or watching sports with them. If my brothers wanted to go to a game, he'd move heaven and earth to take them. But if I wanted to see a new Devonian fossil exhibit at the museum, it was impossible because he was busy. Once, he even said, "Sorry, but that basketball game took up your entire entertainment budget this month." By the way, that was the same game where, when he saw I had brought my copy of Cosmos, he threw it out because I shouldn't have brought a book to a family event. There were many more things my parents did to show their favoritism, but this post is already long enough. What I want to point out is that this behavior didn't just start after the truth came out. It had been happening all along, and I just chalked it up to being the eldest sibling. Middle school was hell. I was, and still am, an introvert who would rather read a book than talk to people. In my old school, I was the odd one out, but I didn't get singled out for it, and I had friends. At the public school, I was quickly singled out and bullied. My mental health declined severely, but my parents refused to intervene because it will toughen you up. I was bullied, but I fought back, and then they became my friends. That's just how guys become friends. Of course, anyone here could guess that the school's faculty was about as helpful as my parents. I did try to fight back once, but all it did was get 3 kids to gang up on me, and I ended up suspended for 3 days. The only friend I managed to make was an older kid named Devin. He was 3 years older than me, but took pity on me and decided to protect me from my bullies. Over the next 3 years, my situation at home got worse. My younger siblings picked up on my parents' apathy and my decreased confidence, and they began to harass me. If they wanted something I had, they took it. They'd call me names and pull pranks on me, and when I told my parents, they said I needed to lighten up. Needless to say, this didn't help my situation. My parents also became much harsher, and I would get beaten from time to time. Towards the end of my first year of middle school, I came home from the library and saw a letter from the middle school I had wanted to attend. I opened it immediately. It was a letter declining YB1 and YS's applications. I didn't see anything for myself, so I went to my parents. They punished me for opening their mail, but when I pushed the issue, they told me that YB1 and YS deserved to go to that school more than I did. At that time, I had near-perfect grades. When I argued that if they could afford to send YB1 and YS, I should be able to go, I was beaten for talking back and opening their mail. I'll be honest. During this time, I did try self-harm. Whenever I did, my situation would briefly improve. I became the center of my parents' attention, teachers would intervene to stop the bullying, and even some kids at school would start being friendly to me. But after about a week, things would go back to the way they were. The only person who was actually there for me in my life was Devin. One day, during the early part of 8th grade, I broke down and told Devin about my biological father. I had been having thoughts about why he abandoned me when he found out my mom was pregnant, and how it was partially his fault that my life was the way it was. I said a lot more. That was the key part. During my venting session, I revealed that my mom had recently let my dad's first and last name slip, so I now knew who he was. Devin offered to help me research my dad. That day, Devin and I went to his house and essentially began cyberstalking him. My bio dad was, and still is, college professor at a research university about 200 miles from where we lived. We also found out that he was married, that I had a younger sister, and that my stepmom was pregnant. That night, Devin and I hatched a plan, which we would carry out the next day. I went to school, and as soon as I stepped off the bus, I went to the high school student parking lot, got into Devin's car, and we left. We arrived at the university around noon. After parking, Devin immediately went to the student center and asked which office my dad worked in, and he got directions. When we got there, my dad was gone on lunch. However, when he returned about an hour later, he saw us sitting outside his office and asked who we were. I remember asking for his name and then asking if he knew my mom. When he confirmed both, I told him who I was and that I believed I was his son. I just want to say, as cheesy as it sounds to me now, Devin had coached me on that line. He probably had just watched a bad Hallmark drama or something. I remember my dad immediately hugged me warmly and kept saying, "Oh my God," over and over. He brought us into his office to talk and canceled his classes for the day. After that, Devin left, and my dad took me home to introduce me to his family. My stepmom was surprised. She knew my dad had a son, but having a 13-year-old pop out of nowhere was quite a shock. They then explained what had happened. According to my dad, he and my mom were dating during their senior year of college, when she told him she was pregnant. Their relationship had been strained, and he suspected that she was cheating on him. He had been planning to break up with her when she told him about the pregnancy. He suspected it was an attempt to stay together, so he told her he would be willing to do a paternity test and co-parent, but refused to stay in the relationship. It turned out my mom had been cheating on him with my stepdad, and when my stepdad had a more positive response, she cut off contact with my dad. When my dad married my stepmom, he told her he might have a child. They had decided to look my mom up on Facebook, and they found a few pictures of me. Remember how I don't share any significant features with my mom or stepdad? Well, it turns out I look almost identical to my dad, so he immediately knew. He had reached out to my mom via Facebook, but she blocked him right away. He had considered getting a lawyer, but figured it would be almost impossible to get custody or even visitation rights without a paternity test, which my mom and stepdad could block. I told him everything my mom and stepdad had put me through, even more than what I've mentioned here. By the time I finished, I was crying, and my stepmom was consoling me. After hearing everything, my dad wordlessly stood up, went into the next room, called a lawyer, and then called the police. Police, social services, and CPS all showed up and took me into custody. To summarize, I was removed from my mom and stepdad's custody and became a temporary ward of the state. Paternity test was taken, which confirmed everything my dad had told me. I was then placed in the care of my dad and stepmom, and I was granted a restraining order against my mom and stepdad until I turned 18. I won't pretend everything was perfect. Looking back, I caused some strain on my dad's marriage because he immediately favored me over my half-sibling. However, my dad and stepmom worked through it and established sensible boundaries. I was enrolled in a much better school, where I was able to make real friends. I never forgot Devin. We stayed in contact, though it wasn't as consistent due to the distance. We still talk regularly. Devin is doing well. After high school, he became an underwater welder for an oil company, which apparently pays very well. We've met up for drinks and to catch up. I asked him why he protected me, and he said he wasn't sure, but for whatever reason, seeing me get bullied made something snap in him. He also said he kind of saw me as someone who needed a big brother figure, and that it just felt like the right thing to do. After high school, I went to college and was fairly popular as my confidence had been completely rebuilt. I majored in biology and minored in geology. I'm currently a PhD student working in paleontology, and I love it. I get to go on university-sponsored digs. Most are in the US, but last year I got to go to South Africa and Namibia. A few months ago, my mom and stepdad reached out to ask if I could tutor YB2 and YS. YS had dropped out of college a few years ago because it was too difficult, but she wanted to go back and finish her program. YB2 wanted to get into a good college next year, but didn't have the grades and wanted help studying for the ACT. During that conversation, I noticed my heart was beating out of control, and I was having difficulty breathing. I'm pretty sure it was a panic attack, but I had never experienced anything like it before. I hung up on my mom and sat on the couch. The next day, I started receiving texts from my mom's kids asking for help, so I blocked all their numbers. I didn't hear from them again until I received a barrage of emails on my university email. They were apologizing for how they had treated me and said they wanted to fix things so we could be a family again. Originally, I planned to send an email back, telling them that I wanted no further contact, and that even hearing from them was triggering a traumatic response over a decade later. I also felt the only reason they were reaching out was to get a free tutor. I never sent that email. Instead, I simply blocked them. In April, I was on a dig in Texas when I received a call from the police telling me they had been called to my apartment because someone had broken in. It was YB1 trying to get in contact with me. I told the police that he wasn't supposed to be there and that I wanted to press trespassing charges. Since it was his first offense, he was able to plea bargain down to 100 hours of community service. I got back home at the end of May, and I haven't heard from them since. I think they finally got the message and decided to stop contacting me. Regardless, I have a strong relationship with my dad now. We've spent a lot of time building that relationship and making up for lost time. I also have a good relationship with my younger half-siblings from my dad and stepmom. I play with them and spend a lot of time with them, although there's a significant age gap between us. My stepmom and I are on good terms. I'm not entirely sure how to describe our relationship, but I would say that while she didn't fully take on the role of a mom in my life, she has become a motherly figure to me. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but it's the best way I can phrase it. I'm not entirely sure how to end this. There might be a message here. Probably not. I just felt like I should share my story. However, as I was proofreading this and recalling the abuse I suffered, I started feeling extremely anxious. I think I might have some suppressed trauma and will be looking into getting therapy. Story 3. I'll never understand why my dad chose his new wife over me. For context, my dad was a loving, doting, and caring father for the first 18 years of my life. He supported me in everything, getting through school, driving lessons, gymnastics lessons, everything. I remember once we had a heart-to-heart, and he cried as he told me I was the light of his life and that he wouldn't know what he'd do without me. Bear in mind, my mom, who was married to him for over 30 years, had only ever seen him cry at his mom's funeral. Then she came along. My mom and dad divorced when I was about 9 years old. I lived with my dad full-time in London while my mom lived in Scotland. I missed my mom, but my dad gave me everything and made sure I was okay. After a while, my dad started dating a new woman. She seemed so lovely at first, but slowly, as time passed, her true colors began to show. She was viciously jealous of my relationship with my dad, to the point where she'd be livid if we ever spent any time together. Then she'd cut me off from both of them for months at a time, over nothing, just tiny disagreements. Worst part, you ask? My dad allowed it all. At first, I would patiently wait until I could contact them again and be all smiles when I did. A few years ago, I decided enough was enough. The loving, caring, supportive father I knew had died. Or at least, that's how I've processed it. This is metaphorical. He's still alive. Do I miss him? No. Do I love him? No. He spat in my face and ripped my heart into a million pieces, more than once. My life is so much better without him. But part of me still wishes he were on the other end of the phone. People say, he's your dad, how can you say that? But believe me, once you've experienced what I've been through, there's no going back from that. He's made it clear his loyalties lie with a woman he's known for less than 5 years, and it's taken time, but I've finally come to terms with that. He's chosen her over his only child. What a freak. Seriously.